It's 2 a.m. and your brain is running simulations. Not of the future. Of the past. What if you'd said yes to that opportunity 3 years ago? What if you'd fought harder for that relationship? What if you'd made the other choice at that fork in the road? Your chest feels tight because somewhere in your mind, there's a version of you living a completely different life, and you can't stop wondering if that version is happier. If that version figured it out. If that version didn't make the mistake you can't stop replaying. The worst part? You're not even sure what you're looking for anymore. An answer? Permission to feel differently? A way to rewrite what's already written? You're stuck in this weird liminal space where you're physically here but mentally living in a timeline that doesn't exist. And everyone around you seems to have made peace with their choices while you're still building case files for trials that are already over. So this happened to me about 6 months ago. I was driving to get coffee, just a regular Tuesday morning, and my phone started playing this song I hadn't heard in probably 4 years. And it wasn't just any song. It was the song from this specific period of my life when I was deciding whether to move across the country for this job opportunity that felt both exciting and terrifying. I remember sitting in my apartment back then, making pro-con lists that got longer and more complicated every day. The job was good. Really good actually. But it meant leaving everything I knew. Leaving the person I was dating. Leaving the comfort of the familiar. And I kept thinking if I just analyze this enough, if I just think through every possible outcome, I'll know the right answer. I ended up saying no. Stayed where I was. Told myself it was the mature choice, the safe choice, the choice that honored my relationships and my roots. And for a while I felt good about it. Relieved even. Like I dodged some unknown bullet. But then that relationship ended anyway 6 months later. And the comfort I'd protected started feeling less like safety and more like stagnation. And suddenly I was stuck in this loop of wondering what would have happened if I'd just taken the leap. So that Tuesday morning, hearing that song, I felt this wave of something I can't quite name. Not regret exactly. More like this ache for a version of my life that I'll never get to know. And I started doing what I always do. I started building this story. In that alternate timeline, I would have moved. I would have been challenged and grown and become this bolder version of myself. I would have met different people, had different experiences, maybe even found some clarity I don't have now. The coffee shop was only 10 minutes away, but I must have lived an entire imaginary life in my head during that drive. I could see it all so clearly. The apartment I would have had. The friends I would have made. The version of me who was braver, more adventurous, more willing to bet on myself. And then I was pulling into the parking lot and the song was ending and I was just me again. Same life. Same choices behind me. Same uncertainty ahead. But now I had this fresh layer of what if sitting on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I got my coffee and sat in my car for a while because I wasn't ready to go back to my day yet. And I started doing this thing I've done 1,000 times before. I started building the case. Not for changing anything now because you can't change the past. But building the case for why that other choice would have been better. Why that other timeline was the one where things worked out. Here's the thing though. I wasn't actually thinking about that job anymore. I was thinking about every choice I've ever questioned. Every door I didn't walk through. Every possibility I left unexplored. It's like my brain keeps this running archive of alternate histories, and any little trigger can open the floodgates. I thought about the person I stopped talking to after a weird argument that never got resolved. What if I'd reached out first? What if I'd been more patient, more understanding, more willing to sit in the discomfort of that conversation? Maybe we'd still be close. Maybe I'd still have that friendship in my life. I thought about the creative project I abandoned halfway through because I convinced myself it wasn't good enough. What if I'd pushed through the messy middle? What if I'd trusted the process instead of my fear? Maybe I'd have something I was proud of now instead of just another unfinished thing haunting my hard drive. And sitting there in my car, coffee getting cold in my hand, I realized how much space these hypotheticals take up in my brain. Like, I could probably clear out an entire room in my mental house if I could just stop housing all these ghost timelines. These phantom versions of my life that I keep furnished and updated even though I'm never going to move into them. The really messed up part is how real they feel. I don't think of them as fantasy. I think of them as missed opportunities. As proof that I've been making the wrong choices. As evidence that somewhere along the way, I zigged when I should have zagged, and now I'm living in the second best version of my life. I started my car and drove to work, and the whole day felt filtered through this lens of what could have been. During meetings, I was half present because part of me was still living in that other timeline. When colleagues talked about their lives, I was measuring their choices against my hypotheticals. When my boss asked me about a project, I found myself wondering what kind of work I'd be doing in that alternate job I never took. By the time I got home that night, I was exhausted. Not from working. From running parallel simulations of my life all day. From maintaining these alternate realities that exist only in my head. From the sheer mental effort of keeping track of all the ways things might have been different. And I couldn't even talk to anyone about it because how do you explain this? How do you say, I'm tired from living lives I never actually lived? How do you articulate this specific kind of grief for experiences you never had with people you never became? I lay in bed that night and I could feel it. The weight of all these unanswered questions. All these unclosed loops. All these alternate endings I've written for chapters that are already finished. And I realized I've been doing this for years. Not just with big decisions but with everything. Every conversation I replay with different words. Every choice I re-examine from new angles. Every ending I refuse to accept as final. It's like I'm living with this constant background noise of what? And I've convinced myself that this is just how my brain works. That I'm just someone who thinks deeply about choices and consequences. That this is thoughtfulness, not torture. But lying there in the dark, I had to admit something to myself. This isn't thoughtfulness. This is a refusal to be where I am. This is me keeping one foot in timelines that don't exist because fully committing to this one, the real one, the one I'm actually living, feels too final. Too much like accepting that this is it. This is the life. These are the choices. This is what I did with my time here. And maybe you know this feeling. Maybe you've got your own archive of alternate timelines. Your own collection of what-ifs that you pull out and examine when you can't sleep. Your own ghost lives that feel more vivid sometimes than the one you're actually living. Because here's what nobody tells you about getting older. Nobody tells you that the hardest part isn't making the wrong choices. It's living with the fact that you'll never know if they were wrong. You'll never get to see the other path. You'll never have proof that you made the right call. You just have to live forward with uncertainty trailing behind you like a shadow. And we're not taught how to do that. We're taught to optimize, to maximize, to make the best possible choice. We're taught that if we just think hard enough, analyze thoroughly enough, we can figure out the right answer. But nobody teaches us what to do when the choice is already made and there's no way to know if it was right. So we do this thing. We run the simulations. We build the hypotheticals. We keep these alternate timelines alive in our heads because if we can just figure out what would have happened, maybe we can make peace with what did happen. Maybe we can stop wondering. Maybe we can finally let it go. Except it doesn't work that way. The wondering doesn't lead to peace. It leads to more wondering. The what-ifs don't resolve. They multiply. Every hypothetical branches into more hypotheticals. Every alternate choice splits into infinite variations. And suddenly you're not just wondering about one decision. You're wondering about every decision. Every moment where you chose left instead of right. Every time you said yes when you could have said no. Every opportunity you took and every opportunity you passed on. And the cruelest part? The version of you that you're imagining in those other timelines, the one who made the different choice? That version has their own what-ifs. They're lying awake wondering about the path you actually took. Because the grass isn't just greener on the other side. The grass is always greener in timelines that don't exist. Always. You're doing the best you can with the information you have, making choices in real time with real consequences, trying to navigate life without a map or a guidebook or any guarantee that you're going the right direction. And then you're punishing yourself for not being omniscient, for not knowing how things would turn out, for being human in a situation that required you to make a bet without seeing the cards. That's what the what-ifs really are. They're a form of self-punishment dressed up as reflection. They're a way of telling yourself that you should have known better, should have chosen wiser, should have been able to predict the unpredictable. They're a refusal to forgive yourself for the crime of not being able to see the future. And I get it. I get why we do this. Because accepting that we'll never know feels like giving up. Like settling. Like admitting that we made choices that might have been wrong and we're just supposed to be okay with that. We're supposed to live with the uncertainty. We're supposed to move forward without resolution. That feels impossible some days. How do you commit to the life you're living when there's always this whisper in your head saying, "But what if you'd chosen differently?" How do you be fully present when part of you is always wondering about the alternate version? How do you build something real when you're still holding space for something that doesn't exist? The answer that nobody wants to hear is that you have to grieve. You have to grieve the lives you didn't live, the versions of yourself you didn't become, the experiences you didn't have. You have to feel the loss of those possibilities not as a failure, but as a natural consequence of being finite, of having one life with limited time and limited capacity to explore every path. And that grief is real. It's valid. It deserves space, because those alternate timelines represent real dreams you had. Real hopes, real versions of yourself you imagined becoming. Letting them go isn't casual. It's not like cleaning out your closet. It's more like acknowledging that you can't be every person you could have been. You can only be the person you are. But we don't make space for that grief. We turn it into what-ifs instead. We turn it into endless hypotheticals. We turn it into mental gymnastics that keep us stuck in the past instead of allowing us to move through it and into something else. We avoid the actual feeling by replacing it with thinking, with analyzing, with simulating. And in the process, we rob ourselves of the one thing we actually have. Right now. This moment. This life. This timeline. The one that's real. The one where you actually exist. The one where your choices have already been made and their consequences are already unfolding and there's still time to do something with what you've got. Because here's the thing that took me way too long to understand. The what-ifs aren't keeping your options open. They're keeping you paralyzed. They're not honoring the paths you didn't take. They're preventing you from fully walking the path you're on. They're not protecting you from regret. They're guaranteeing it because you'll reach the end of this life having spent half of it living in timelines that never existed. So I mentioned that Tuesday with the coffee, right? Well, there's more to that story. Because I didn't just sit in that parking lot feeling sorry for myself. I did something I'd been avoiding for 4 years. I looked up the person who got the job I turned down. The one who moved across the country. The one who was, theoretically, living my alternate timeline. And I'm not proud of this, but I went deep. Their social media, their LinkedIn, trying to piece together what that life actually looked like. Trying to see if the grass really was greener. And what I found completely shifted something in me. This person, who from the outside seemed to be living this exciting, dynamic life full of adventure and growth, they'd posted something a few months back during a vulnerable moment. They were struggling. Deeply. They talked about the isolation of having moved somewhere where they didn't know anyone. The exhaustion of always having to be on, in a high-pressure job. The relationships they'd lost touch with. The way they sometimes lay awake wondering if they'd made a huge mistake leaving everything familiar behind. They were having their own what? About the life I was actually living. The life I'd chosen. And it hit me so hard I actually had to close my laptop. All this time, I'd been constructing this perfect alternate reality where that choice led to clarity and growth and becoming a better version of myself. But the reality was just different challenges. Different struggles, different reasons to lie awake at 2 a.m. questioning everything. There was no winning timeline. There was no choice that would have saved me from uncertainty. There was no path that led to figured out. There were just different paths with different obstacles and different gifts and different reasons to wonder if the grass was greener somewhere else. I started thinking about all the other what-ifs I'd been carrying, and I realized something that felt both crushing and liberating at the same time. Every single alternate timeline I'd been imagining was fiction. Not because those things couldn't have happened, but because I'd removed all the messy, complicated, unpredictable reality from them. I'd created highlight reels of lives I never lived, editing out all the moments of doubt and difficulty and mundane frustration that would have definitely been there. The relationship I wondered about saving? Maybe we would have stayed together. Or maybe we would have dragged out an incompatibility for years, making each other miserable, wasting time we could have spent finding better matches. The creative project I abandoned? Maybe finishing it would have led somewhere. Or maybe I would have finished it and realized it still wasn't what I wanted it to be, and I'd be carrying that disappointment instead. Every what if I'd been torturing myself with was based on an incomplete picture. I was comparing my real, complicated, messy life to sanitized versions of paths I didn't take. And of course the alternate versions looked better. I'd written them that way. I'd made them into escape fantasies instead of actual possible realities. But here's where it gets even deeper. That night, I started journaling about this realization. And I wrote something that surprised me. I wrote, what if the life I'm living is the one someone else is dreaming about? Because while I was busy imagining all the ways my life could have been better, I'd completely missed the ways it was already good. The friends I had made by staying. The growth that happened through the challenges I faced. The person I'd become through the specific set of experiences I'd actually had. Someone out there might be running simulations where they made choices like mine and things worked out. Where they stayed instead of going, or committed instead of running, or chose security over adventure. And in their version, it led to everything I was taking for granted. I thought about the relationship that ended. Yeah, it hurt. But it also taught me things about myself I needed to learn. It showed me patterns I needed to see. It pushed me toward growth I was avoiding. Would I have learned those things in an alternate timeline where we stayed together? Maybe. Or maybe I would have learned different things. Or maybe I would have avoided learning altogether. There's no way to know. And that's when the real shift happened for me. The what-ifs weren't actually about the past. They were about my relationship with the present. They were about my inability to fully commit to the life I have because I'm too busy curating the lives I don't have. They were about my resistance to being here, now, in this specific timeline with these specific circumstances and this specific version of myself. I'd been treating my what-ifs like they were deep thinking, like I was someone who really examined their choices and learned from their experiences. But really, I was someone who refused to accept that the past is finished. Someone who kept it alive by constantly relitigating decisions that couldn't be unmade. Someone who preferred the safety of imaginary scenarios to the vulnerability of committing to reality. And maybe this is hitting you right now. Maybe you're realizing that you've been doing the same thing. Keeping a foot in timelines that don't exist. Running simulations instead of living forward. Curating highlight reels of lives you never lived while barely paying attention to the one you have. Here's what I want you to know. You're not broken for doing this. You're not uniquely flawed. You're human, trying to make sense of choices that can't be fully understood because you'll never see the full picture. You'll never know what would have happened. And your brain, trying to protect you from the discomfort of that uncertainty, keeps building these alternate scenarios. Keep searching for answers that don't exist. But at some point you have to choose to be here. Not because this is the best possible timeline, but because it's the real one. Because you only get one life and spending it living in hypotheticals is just another way of not living at all. I still have moments where the what-ifs creep in. I probably always will. But now when they show up, I recognize them for what they are. Not wisdom. Not insight. Just my brain's refusal to accept finality. Just my resistance to the grief of letting go. just my fear of committing fully to what is instead of what might have been. And slowly I'm learning to redirect that energy. Instead of asking, what if I'd made a different choice back then? I'm starting to ask, what can I do with where I am right now? Instead of maintaining these ghost timelines, I'm trying to fully inhabit this one. Instead of measuring my life against alternate versions that don't exist, I'm trying to see what I have with clear eyes. It's not easy. Some days I still catch myself building the case for a different past. But I'm learning to close that case file and come back to the present. To the people who are actually in my life. To the work I'm actually doing. To the version of myself I actually am, not the one I imagine I could have been. So here's what I want to ask you. Write me a comment about the what if that takes up the most space in your head. The alternate timeline you can't stop thinking about. The choice you keep re-examining. Don't try to justify it or make it make sense. Just name it. Put it out there. Because sometimes the first step to letting something go is admitting you've been carrying it. And if this whole thing hit home for you, hit that like button. Not for the algorithm, but as a way of saying, yeah, I've been living in ghost timelines too. As a way of acknowledging that we're all walking around with these parallel versions of our lives in our heads, trying to figure out which one is real, which one matters, which one we're supposed to be living. Tell me in the comments about a time when you realized that the alternate version you'd been imagining probably wasn't as perfect as you thought. When you saw that the grass wasn't actually greener, just different. When you understood that every choice comes with its own set of trade-offs and challenges. We're all figuring this out together. We're all trying to make peace with the fact that we'll never know if we made the right choices. We'll never get to see the other paths. We'll never have the certainty we crave. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the goal isn't to figure out if we chose right. Maybe the goal is to choose to be here, fully, in the life we actually have. Let's build a space in these comments where we can be real about this stuff. Where we can admit that we're still thinking about that job we didn't take, that person we lost touch with, that opportunity we passed on. Where we can grieve the lives we didn't live so we can finally, fully live the one we have. And if you know someone who's stuck in the what-ifs, send this their way. Not as a fix, but as a reminder that they're not alone in this. That we're all carrying alternate timelines around in our heads. And that maybe it's time to set them down and see what we can build with the timeline we're actually in.